Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Soulcast Media live event. If everybody can see me all right, give me a thumbs up on your end. It is how I know the audio and the tech stuff is working because you never know these days when you are dialing in virtually. It is so fantastic seeing everybody. We have over 110 people dialed in from across the world right now. And how fantastic is this? It was funny behind the scenes here, Dan and I were saying, like, how many people are going to show up to this? Are we talking like 5, 10? Like, what are we saying here? So it is so great to see a great international crowd. And I mean, I was behind the scenes looking at the chat function, and we've got folks from Britain, Kenya, Pakistan, Houston, Texas, here in the States. I'm dialing in from California. We have folks from Florida, Virginia. This is amazing. And this is why I love putting together an event like this, because we are all here for one reason. We are here to talk about work, our career, accelerating in our careers. In fact, today we are going to be talking about something that I'm really excited to talk about, which is the skills for the future of work. My guest, Dan, and I, we have so many things to talk about. So before we get started, I want to share a few housekeeping tips. So this event is going to be about 45 minutes long. And as much as it is a conversation between Dan and I, this is something that we want you to participate in. So, actually, right now in the chat function, let us know what industry are you in? Put it into the chat function. Are you in the tech industry, in finance, medical? Let us know in the chat function. And I think it'd be so interesting to see the variety of folks in terms of where people are dialing in from. We know the countries. Now we'd be interested to see what industry are you in? Okay. So for those who are joining our Soulcast Media live event for the very first time, I want to say welcome. I host these about every other week or so. And again, I have a fantastic guest like Dan come on, and we talk all things, again, career and work. Now, for those who don't know me, my name is Jessica Chen, and I'm the founder and CEO of Soulcast Media, and we are a communications training company. I'm also a very proud LinkedIn Learning instructor, and that is actually how Dan and I got connected because he is part of the LinkedIn Learning team, which I will share in just a little bit. I have, oh my gosh, I think it's 10 courses on LinkedIn Learning, and my first course was developing executive presence on video calls. And let me tell you, over the last few years, over 1 million people have watched that course, which is fantastic. And the reason why I created that course was because prior to Soulcast Media, I used to be on TV. So I used to be a news reporter, running all around town, talking about the big issues of the day. So if you can imagine, communicating and doing it on camera was something that I had to learn. So now I teach it to folks. At least that's what I taught in my first LinkedIn Learning course. Now I'm more general communication skills, and I go in and we do a lot of communications training. So needless to say, I love talking about communication skills because I do think it's something that we can all learn and improve on. All right. So let's get started with today's event. And by the way, if you are not already connected to me or Dan on LinkedIn, I highly encourage you to connect with us because if there are any questions that we didn't get a chance to answer today, please let us know. All right, I'm thrilled to invite my guest, Dan, up. So, Dan is the global head of content strategy at LinkedIn, meaning he has all the insight of what are the skills, what are the most important skills that we need to prepare ourselves for the future. Because there's no doubt work is changing. The environment is changing. I mean, we're going to be talking about AI in a little bit, but yeah, how is that going to change the work that we do? So, with that, I am thrilled to invite my guest, Dan, up. So, Dan, welcome to our Soulcast Media Live.
Nice to see you. And like you said, what a wonderful international crowd. Also, thanks to everybody who's here at unusual hours. If any of you are doing that, I do unusual hours sometimes myself for a global program. So I appreciate anybody who's here at strange hours.
This is true. I mean, it's kind of our early afternoon, right before lunchtime, but I know for folks, it might be your evening, your morning. So, again, thank you. Okay, Dan, I did a quick intro of who you are, but for those who don't know you and the work that you do, What is it that you do on a day-to-day basis?
So I lead an extraordinary team. Content is really has two big parts. There's content strategy and content production. And my excellent friend and colleague Fiona Traylor leads the mighty global content production team, which are the people who are really making the courses when it comes to the directors and the editors, and the graphic artists and such. My part of it, my team's part of it, is what we call content strategy. And if content is a river, which we often use rivers as we love river, I love rivers. It's my favorite metaphor. Um, with instructors like yourself here, and then learners here, and then kind of content in the middle. My team is this first half largely. So we do a lot of things, but one of our core functions is we're building a library. And so it's leading this team that's figuring out what courses we need, what great instructors we can work with. And then there's a whole ton of work that goes around that too, around like the assessments that we make and the data to drive it and the learning path. So it's a pretty big remit. But at the core, we're kind of that first intentional piece of the library. And one of our great joys and privileges really is working with instructors like yourself.
I feel like you and your team have such a critical role in shaping the conversation of what are the skills that employees need? What are the skills employers should look for? Because you mentioned that you and your team, you curate that library. So in many ways, you are identifying what are the most relevant skills that people need. And then you're putting that into, okay, we're going to create those courses. So in many ways, I feel like a lot of folks in the learning and development industry, they're turning to LinkedIn and they're saying, okay, what is LinkedIn saying are the trends, right? And LinkedIn puts a lot of fantastic reports out about like, the workplace skills. So I feel like, yes, Dan, you and your team play such a critical role in shaping the conversation of what people really need to focus on. And I'm just looking at where the industries people are from. I mean, we have a variety. We have folks in real estate, finance, IT, public relations, food, rural development, legal and finance. So, I mean, okay, the question is, where do we even start, Dan? Where do we even start? Okay, let's start with this question. When we think about the skills for the future of work, in your perspective, Dan, what are the most important skills? What do people need to be thinking about from a high level right now?
Yeah, I mean, this is more of a personal answer, maybe a little bit less of a data-driven answer. But I think the three core things are collaboration, resilience, and the way we talk about it sometimes is growth mindset, but learning actually the third key piece of it. Um, and I will say one thing, by the way, to your point about us and our role, I do think LinkedIn gets to play a pretty special role here. LinkedIn um, has a particular view of the economy, and as you said, there's a lot of reports that we're sharing out, and my team is fortunate to benefit from those as well. My team, though, while I think we are hopefully seeing where things are headed, right, and trying to get there before learners need it, so that we have the library ready for them. A lot of what we're doing is listening, right? As not just shaping, but listening. So that includes listening to the signals in our data, other data that's coming out, listening to instructors. And a big part of it for us is also listening to clients, going on client calls, working with sales. So like really, I think LinkedIn is a big part of seeing the future. And then I think in LinkedIn Learning, we're a part of that, as well as listening to what's going out there and kind of partnering with everybody. But yeah, but those would be, if I was picking three, it'd be resilience, collaboration, and growth mindset.
Because how many folks does LinkedIn serve in the learning capacity? It's like,
There is a number there that, to be candid, I'm not sure what what is a shareable number. I will say we aspire to be what's called a leader in broad-based training, and I believe we are that. So and maybe I'll say the numbers are fabulous, and they're not fabulous from a number standpoint. What drives my team and what drives me is impact.
yeah.
And maybe I'll tangent for a brief part of my personal story, if that's okay with you, that you and I talked about how I was in publishing for years, and I love that. And in publishing, every book was sort of its own journey. That's where I first also got really fired up by seeing what authors in that case could do.
Mhm.
When I first got into online learning, though, is when I was first introduced to the library as this thing that we're building together as kind of a social object. And that's when my mission really became a little bit broader. And I think all of us who are on this have that. We're kind of addicted to that piece, which is what you can do with a really carefully curated, thoughtful library full of extraordinary instructors, based on a great conversation with the world about what the world needs. So the numbers are great, but the numbers are, a sign of hopefully what the library is is doing to help people become who they're trying to become.
Exactly. And I will say, we have close to 150 people right now who are tuning in from all over the world because I imagine people here are like, I care about my career growth. I want to set myself up for success, which is why I love doing these events because it really brings together like-minded, ambitious folks who want to continuously grow. So when I asked you earlier, Dan, like what are the, top skills? I was very surprised actually that you mentioned more of those soft skills of collaboration, resilience, and having that growth mindset. Why did that come to your mind first?
I think everything else depends on that. I think our library is there's a tremendous focus on tech and also creative and also tools generally, right? So that's a huge portion of what we're covering. But to use those to good end, you need a foundation of growth mindset to keep investing in yourself and keep
Yeah.
prioritizing that. Collaboration, because all the best and biggest things happen when you do them in concert with other people, and resilience because that's the nature of life, right? I'll tell you with my I have two kids, and when one of them went to a new middle school, the principal talked about the key life skill they were going to teach in that middle school was resilience, and that really stuck with me because everything else sort of depends on that. So on top of that, you definitely want to get to powerful, scarce, specific skills, hard skills, we might say, or technical skills
Mhm.
to have a tremendous impact. But
Mhm.
it builds on this foundation of can you communicate and work well with others? Can you go through the ups and downs and come out stronger, right? And can you keep investing in who you want to be tomorrow?
We will be talking about more of those hard skills, but I love starting off with just talking about the soft skills because the fact that we have such a broad range of folks from across different industries, this is universal because we can talk about more technical skills, but perhaps one person in this industry might not find it as relevant as a person in another industry. But what you're saying of collaboration, resilience, growth mindset, that is universal. And, when I just think back to the work that we do at Soulcast Media, which is communications, like I've doubled down on wanting to teach communications versus broader, just let's say leadership, because I do feel communications is the glue to all of these things. Because at the end of the day, if a person isn't a good communicator, how can you be a better collaborator? How can you build that resilience and have those sometimes difficult conversations, right? And I think communications is what it comes down to. And what I also think is so important about communication skills is that it's actually a skill that can be learned just as much as I think collaboration can actually be a skill, resilience. Because here's the thing sometimes I feel, and I'm so happy to hear that your son's school is prioritizing this, but sometimes I feel like school in that traditional structure doesn't really teach you those most important soft skills. So I will say this one last bit. It's very exciting because we've just started partnering with a lot of higher education institutions because they see that the communications work that we're doing is something that they need to get their college students prepared for. Because once these college students go into the real world, they don't know how to talk to their managers. They don't know how to write or craft a good email. They don't know how to advocate for themselves. So that is very much what I teach. So Dan, what are your thoughts about communications in
Well,
general?
completely agree. And for me, communication is one of the big pillars under collaboration. And you can
Yeah.
come up with everybody could organize this in different ways, but you can't collaborate. It's the why. You can't collaborate without communication. I'll tell you by the way, can we just do one tech check for a sec? One person mentioned that it was getting disconnected. Is anybody else having troubles? I just wanted to make sure we're doing okay before.
Yeah, let us know if you're having any trouble.
I can
Sometimes
hear you.
if there is, you can just refresh it, and sometimes we'll just come back.
I'll say on communication, one thing that took me a while to figure out, and I'm sure that you know this well, since this is been such a focus for you throughout your career, is that of all the skills, every skill benefits from some sort of feedback. What
Mhm.
could be writing and playing guitar, writing poetry. It could be anything. It could be uh, physical things that you're doing, or athletic things. Communication is, by the nature of it, um, a skill like you said that you can develop,
Yeah.
and that you really can only develop with feedback because it's sort of uniquely this skill that the essence of it is how well did you get across what you're trying to get across to the other person. And so being maybe exceptionally open to feedback with communication feels to me like a prerequisite for improvement. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And as you can tell, I tend to talk pretty quickly. Believe it or not, I talk slower than I would on my own because of years of getting really great, honest feedback. I sometimes joke, I work with the international team a lot, and I was over in Austria for the first time years ago, and the first word I was taught was langsam, which means slow down, Dan. So, like, without that kind of feedback, though, you can't imagine how ridiculously quickly I'd be talking right now.
And just a quick last note about communications. I'm very open with sharing with people that I was not a good communicator early on. Part of it is my personality. I'm fairly shy and fairly introverted, and culturally too. I feel like growing up as an Asian person in America, I just wasn't taught those like skills of having to advocate for myself. So, if you imagine when I started out on TV, I'm surrounded by these loud, charismatic, very ultra confident people. And people just saw me as that kind of quiet person, like who was just there. Right. And it quickly made me go, wait a second. If I really want to succeed, it's not that I have to be loud or extroverted, but I got to be strategic with how I communicate and even when I communicate. So it took me on this like journey. We talk about growth mindset. It took me on this journey of realizing that I had to double down on my communication skills.
And
So
yeah, each one of those, like my personal pillars of collaboration with communication in there, resilience and growth mindset, are all things you can get better at, right? That's the nature of it. And your whole journey, it sounds like, required all three. By the way, in the chat, somebody said this appears to be pre-recorded, so that would be your proof that this is not pre-recorded. This is
this is not pre recorded. We are live.
we are live.
I want to just call out Jessica made this comment of I hope these soft skills can avoid us from being replaced by AI in the future, which is the perfect segue into talking about okay, AI. I mean, that's the big thing. It's in all the headlines, Dan. What's your perspective on this?
Well, first up, I think everything, the story of LinkedIn Learning actually goes back a couple decades. Um, there was a company called lynda.com. There was another company called Video to Brain. These were European and American companies that came together and then became LinkedIn Learning. And they were both born out of disruption, out of transformation, because in those moments, the founders of those companies and the teams recognized that there was a need and there was an opportunity to serve. And that's happened over and over again through our journey. It happened, in a powerful, sometimes painful, but historic way back in 2020 at a bunch of levels. And we saw this kind of seismic shock of need to learn that was going on, whether it was DEIB and increased awareness of what the journey was and how much farther we needed to go, or wellness as people were trying to manage that moment, or working remotely, or eventually working hybrid, or eventually for some folks going back to the office and managing all those pieces. And again, there was this sort of like another epiphany moment of how important it is to keep retooling yourself, because the skills you had before were not going to be sufficient. You could build on them for sure, but you had to keep investing in yourself. So the first thing I would say was, AI is not a news story, right? AI has been a part of the industry. It's been a part of LinkedIn, of course, and our fellow companies out there. It's been a part of our learning program for many years. But certainly we're at a bit of an inflection point. That's a fair statement, right? And in that inflection point, which a lot of it really, I think people felt it viscerally on November 30th when ChatGPT launched, and there was that weekend where I think 1 million people signed up. And that Monday, a lot of us were talking about, well, okay, this is interesting. This is an acceleration. The number one thing I would say is, there are specific skills that I think people are going to be finding are really helpful to them to make their jobs better, and to take things that have previously been constraints and kind of break through those constraints and get to more good stuff. And there are going to be challenges, and there's always stress with this kind of stuff. Any kind of transformation has some stress that goes with it. And for you and me, and this will sound, a little bit, I'm biased on this, but for you and me, like one of the really powerful things about this is that the number one advice we would give is to learn into it. A friend of mine said, and not just lean into it, to really embrace this moment of who we are today. We can empower ourselves to transform into the folks that we want to be going forward, and we can work together. I also have some really sharp people on my team who are saying essentially, isn't it great that we're being part of this in a responsible way that helps us, shape what it becomes. Because you'll see a lot of folks talking about this, that we're going to all shape this together. But professionally, the number one thing is, to to play and to practice and to read and to yeah, kind of immerse yourself in it so that it feels natural and it feels you're floating with that river. I think would be my advice.
I feel like I hear a lot of people go, "Ooh, I'm like a bit scared, of what this is going to mean for my career." And the way I see it is that it shouldn't be something that we should be afraid of. In fact, I feel like we should appreciate the power of it, but then also understand what we can do to work complementary to it. We talked about communication skills, for example, right? And I feel like what AI does is it has the capacity and the speed to do things that humans it would just take way longer for us to do manually, right? But that doesn't mean that what we can offer goes away. I feel like it's figuring out, okay, we know that AI, for example, it can take massive amount of information and condense it. But as humans, and this kind of goes back to the soft skills, right? That I feel like the robots out there that they won't be able to compete with us in that way. So in speaking about communication skills, they can't verbally communicate in that way, or at least, as humans, we don't always want to be talking to a robot in that way. So for us, how can we leverage and improve our speaking skills to communicate what AI is telling us, the information it's shooting out at us? By the way, really quickly, if anybody's having any connection errors, if you refresh, it may just bring you back here, and that's usually a quick fix. So, um, yeah. So, Dan, I mean, I'm just curious. Like, when you look at the library of skills that you want folks to be learning, like, what are you seeing the trends? Like, what are people going to be seeing more in the content library overall?
Yeah, I mean there are core areas that are just as important today as they were November
Mhm.
29th. So like leadership and management is super powerful, super critical.
Yeah.
Um, Technical topics like SQL, Power BI, Python, data analytics, human skills, as you say, like communications, because you'd be happy to hear is sort of an evergreen. Specific tools like you would imagine Excel and things like this. All of those are, in fact, what I would say is with this increased interest in learning, it
Mhm.
drives the whole with this extra focus on AI and Gen AI, it's kind of bringing people back to this idea that like, oh, I do need to always be learning. I need to be always investing in myself. So we're kind of seeing it impact the whole library in a really positive way. And then I think, there were specific topics depending on your area um, that have really been on a lot of our minds. Just understanding what Gen AI means, thinking through what it could mean for your business and for business generally. As somebody said in the chat, understanding how to effectively use ChatGPT for all sorts of use cases. Um, I think for developers, it's going to be an especially interesting and powerful
Mhm.
tool. You'll hear about pair programming, for example, as a way to use, co-pilots to really augment what you're doing. And I generally think, I don't know how folks on the call feel, but um, I know from my vantage point, there's always way more work to do than there's time. So like my first thing is like, if this means we can start to get to some of the stuff that we couldn't previously get to, whether you're a programmer, whether you're a content person like myself, because it will certainly impact content as well,
Mhm.
whether you're in data or data analytics, whatever field you're in. Um, we think of it as a multiplier and as an accelerator. And I don't think it's really being designed as a replacement. It's being designed as this is maybe not the greatest metaphor, but you think about the movie Aliens. If you've seen the movie Aliens and the character Ripley, and then Ripley has this exoskeleton, and we won't go beyond that because, of course, specifics of that. It's a lot of fighting and punching and things like that. But right, it wasn't about replacing Ripley. It was
Mhm.
about giving Ripley uh, this extra power that she needed for the situation. So that's how I view it. And I'll also throw in to your point about the way it's going to change what we can do. That's not a new idea. I've been doing this
Mhm.
long enough that I was using for any designers who are chatting with us today. I was using Photoshop 2.51 if that rings a bell. That's a long time ago. And I remember when I went from doing my own drop shadows, which was a big deal back then, to being able to do that with like 2 clicks. And I never was stressed about that. I was like enthused about that. So as long as you're doing it thoughtfully, the idea that technology is going to help you take things that are hard and make them easier is not new. I think what's new and novel is some of the areas that it's going to help with that may be
Mhm.
more possible for, and the speed with which it's happening, which is the reason that, like, more than back when I was using Photoshop 2.51, there's this wave of need for kind of investing in yourself that I see coming. And that, as a human on planet Earth, I think is a positive thing. I have this, like, very optimistic view of a coming golden age of learning, believe it or not. Again, super biased, but I've been doing this for a while, and it feels like one positive piece of this, one big positive piece, is if we all are encouraged, me included, to spend a bit more time investing in our abilities to have impact, that's not a bad thing.
I'm actually curious in our audience right now, who here has played around or has touched some mode of AI in that traditional way? Let us know in the chat function. You can just write like yes or no, because I'd be curious to see uh, if people have really embraced and played around with this. I mean, I'll tell you that when, you know, ChatGPT opened, I was one of the first ones to also sign up for it because I was so curious. And, you know, for me, I feel like it has really complemented the work that I do. And I don't see like in a competition in any way, but it has reduced some of the more manual work that goes into it. Um, yeah, so I'm seeing Russell. Yes, I have exclamation mark. Um, which is fantastic because, like I said earlier, I don't and I love your analogy, Dan, of like, it's not something that we need to be afraid of. It's actually something that is complementing us to make us stronger, right? So,
Yeah, and another thing I've heard a bunch that resonates with me, and this is hardly an original notion, is that generally with the future, what happens in the near term is less dramatic than you expect, and what happens in the long term is more dramatic than you expect. We've probably all heard that idea, right? And I sort of feel that here, and we've already seen in some of the stuff that we're doing, oh, the first result is sort of surprisingly not that great. But then we dig a little bit deeper, and many people have probably heard about prompt engineering, which is something I'm not an expert in, but we have great courses on it. And as we get more sophisticated with the prompt engineering, something that didn't come out that great, well, suddenly actually it's really valuable. And what helps us in learning, I think, is being able to answer the question, valuable for what? So maybe that's the advice I'll give folks generally. Whatever your industry, whatever your role, um, AI is a tool.
mhm,
Technology is a tool.
mhm.
And AI for AI's sake, this is very much me speaking. This whole conversation is me just speaking as me, like for myself. But my POV is AI for AI's sake is less, is pure research. That there's a place for that. But for any of us in business, anything we do, any technology we use, for example, coming back to a clear for what statement is really, really helpful. And it helps us separate out the interesting from the important.
Okay, so I want to pivot really quickly because I've been hearing a lot out there about being skills first, like just those words. Skills first in how employers, how companies should hire people now, and valuing skills first. And that's being an approach. So when I heard that, I was like, what does that even mean? I mean, like, is that a novel thing or is that something, you know? So Dan, I'm sure you've heard of this, but like being skills first, and I kind of see LinkedIn sort of like paving the way for us to kind of think more in that way. But what does it mean to be skills first? And then secondly, what does it mean to, you know, all the people who are watching right now? Like, what do they need to know about this skills first approach to work?
Yeah, that's a one. I didn't know we were going to talk about that. I'm thrilled to talk about that. That's a great topic. I will say it is something that's very important to us at LinkedIn. And the real voice for this, I would say, is like Brian Roslansky, for example, our CEO. So I don't want to. I'm going to be the voice of Dan Brodnitz, but LinkedIn really believes in this, and I think we're building toward that idea. But so I'll just speak for myself on how I see it, knowing that it's one of those things different people can look at a little bit
Mhm.
differently. One thing is the idea of skills as as a common currency, like the idea of skills and what you can do and what you can contribute, um, being really turned into a way to like operationalize in a way to help people establish their value so that they can unlock opportunity, which is like career development, for example, moving forward in their industry or in their role. And while that you say those words and it might sound kind of like, well, of course, that's not the way it always was, right?
Mhm.
There's a long history of um, what degree you had, being what school you went to, for example,
Yeah.
being a primary, or even another one that's more crisp for me is what role. There's a long history of you can get this job if you've done this job. So just to give you one
Mhm.
example of this, a different question would be you can get this job if you can do this job. And you might be able to do this job um, without having had that exact job title before. I'll tell you, there was a great message from LinkedIn years ago that I think about all the time, which was "You're closer than you think." If anybody's seen, there were these beautiful ads that had music by the band Wilco, who I love, off their their Woody Guthrie record. It's coming back to me now, but that they did with the immortal Billy Bragg. Side note on music, but that idea of "you're closer than you think." I think that's like a lot of what we're up to on the learning side. A lot of what I'm up to is if people have most of the skills to advance themselves, but they're missing one or two or three, and if we build a system that helps them identify those gaps, like we have skill evaluations, for example, that we can use so people can identify, oh, I need to strengthen it here. And then we have learning that helps you fill those gaps and
Mhm.
plug it all into a larger, in our case, LinkedIn ecosystem
Mhm.
that helps you connect that with outcomes and opportunities. It's good for equity at so many
Mhm.
levels, and it's good for opportunity, and it's even good for efficiency in the sense of like getting the right talent at the right time to do the right job. So skills first is, on the one hand, it might seem kind of common sense, but when you start to play it out, it becomes a pretty, I think, big and wonderful, empowering idea. And yeah, it's something that a lot of us are thinking about. And yeah, glad you brought that up. That's at the heart of some of what we're doing. And by the way, if you go all the way back to Ojai, California, where Linda was born, that term did not exist. But Linda and Bruce, who were the founders, and then Gerhard Koren, who was the founder of Video to Brain, these were the ideas they were talking about. So it's been with us for so long. I talk to chief learning officers. They're very passionate about this idea. And I think we're living through a moment where it's going from an idea to reality. And that's super exciting.
Okay, I just had like a few aha moments as you were talking because I think about how the many of us out there who want to do a career pivot, for example, right? And their resume reads based on what they currently have done. So when they're applying for a job, the recruiter's saying, well, you never worked in this industry, you've never done, so we're not even going to consider you at all. And, suddenly that door is just closed. I'll share a personal story. There was a period of my time when I was thinking about leaving television, leaving news, and just going into something completely different. But part of the reason why I didn't even do that was because I felt, even though I knew I had a lot to offer, I felt that the reality of the situation was those recruiters, they wouldn't understand. And even if I made those connection, right? Because they always say in your resume, make the connection between what you know and what you can offer. I felt like even though I would make that connection, they would just read what's your title, right? Analyst, associate, whatever. And if it didn't match, honestly, maybe it didn't match like the algorithm, right, to pull out your resume for them to view, then you had no chance, right? And I always felt like that was incredibly frustrating. So I feel like for you, LinkedIn, and just learning and development in general to really think skills first, I think that's huge because it opens up so many more opportunities where individuals just have to learn those skills, and then suddenly it's like, okay, I can see the value in that. Dan, I have a question then. Is this then like, those technical colleges out there where it's very tangible skills? Is that kind of like, you know, like something like that?
Well, first off, if it's okay, you made me have an epiphany. Is that all right? Can I share my epiphany and then I'll get to that question, which is, I didn't realize until you were saying that my career has the same moment, right? I was in publishing. So I was was a desktop publisher back when that was, I don't know how many people, who remembers desktop publishing, right? It was a fabulous part of my run, and an editor, uh, did some marketing stuff, developmental editor, publisher. And I felt like I was boxed in though
Yeah.
to print, which I love. My wife and I have a small press that way. I read paper books. I love paper books and Kindle and audio, but still have a ton of passion there. But I had to make the leap. And a friend of mine said, we are that, but we're also e-learning specialists. That was the phrase that I think he used. And I was like, oh, that's right. I have transferable skills, right? So these ideas go back a long time. But
Yeah.
back then I had to navigate for myself. How do I define my transferable skills in a way that's compelling outside of print publishing? And I think what's happening now is, instead of every individual like you or me, and I'm sure many people on the call,
Mhm.
sorry guys, see all this PageMaker forever. PageMaker on a Mac SE20 was how I learned to do desktop publishing on my college humor magazine. So there you go. But anyway, I think a lot of us have tried to have
Yeah.
had more or less success navigating that. And the thing is, what if the world of work ends up evolving to embrace that instead of you or me and other people having to figure that out on our own. So to your question about, I think I won't speak to those other
Yeah.
schools or businesses, but I will say there is a thing around being able to validate and prove that you have the technical skills that you have, right? And we can play a role there too. And so we, for example, have a new series of professional certificates that we
Hmm.
do in partnership with Lambda Test and Zendesk and Blue Prism and Microsoft and others. And that's a way to uh, help people. Learning is about comprehending, I think, retaining,
Hmm.
practicing. And at some level, it's also about demonstrating,
Yeah.
proving, especially when you tie it to career development. So if you're going to do all those pieces, I think you're right that however you want to talk about the validation piece, it's essential because you're not working in a vacuum. If you're one person, if you're in a gig situation and it's just you and your work, that's great. But for everybody who's part of a larger system, they absolutely need a way to prove and show that they
Yeah.
can do what they say they can do. And I think that's a key part of skills first too.
I love that. I feel like now it seems like it's a very roundabout way to try to get your foot in the door. And I love seeing like there's a lot of folks in the comments who are like, that's literally what I'm in. I'm in this position right now. I'm trying to pivot. I can't because people are focused on my title. So I feel like right now it feels like it's like, yeah, it's just this long, windy road to try to make your skills like relevant and talk about how transferable it is. But now that employers hopefully are thinking skills first, that conversation, that recognition will just be a lot more clear and direct. And I
Yeah,
think that's great.
I think that's right. And for me, uh, being at LinkedIn, it's lovely to be a part of that. I think it's a really profound shift that's happening, and to have that shift happen at the same moment as what I think is this kind of dawning age of real awareness of the value of investing in yourself. It's a pretty common, powerful and motivating combination. We talked a little bit. I will say, just as happy talk for a sec. One of the things I can't quite figure out is I've been doing this for a while, and everybody who knows me, I think, it works with me, knows it's hard and challenging and super fun and motivating every day. It's a mystery to me, actually, but I think that's part of it, is that it keeps shifting and changing. And in this particular moment, any of my colleagues, if anyone's on this chat from the competition, let's say, all of us who are in this space, it's a pretty motivating moment to be trying to help people learn.
I see Ethel. Her comment is if candidates need to evolve their thinking and adopt a growth mindset, well, interviewers should also develop the same skills in assessing potential candidates. I mean, I completely agree. Okay, Dan, we've been chatting and we're almost at the top of the hour, which to me, I'm like, oh my God, where did the time go? Okay. So, as we kind of like start to wrap up here, if you were to share with all our attendees, when we think about the skills for the future of work, where should their head be at right now? Like if they were going to like take some steps, some actionable steps, for example, after this, where would you direct them to go so they continue on this journey?
One, I think it's almost always going to be a combination of hard skills and human skills. Let's say it's a false choice to do one or the other. So you want to think about whether you use our tools or other tools. You want to try and whether you use it. Actually, the best path sometimes is feedback, but you get a clear sense of what your own opportunities are. Find out what you enjoy and what motivates you. Lean into that, and be intentional about who you are today, who I am today. This is what I try to do, and who I want to be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. I do think the core skills are very resilient themselves. So we talked about some of them, but it's productivity tools. Depending on your field, it might be things like Python or SQL. It might be data heavy, depending
Mhm.
on your role. It's depending on your role again. It could be leadership and management. It's absolutely communications and collaboration. I think specifically when it comes to AI, there's a lot of things you can see the headlines that are coming, but we're going to actually share a handful of courses. I think, is that right? Before I say this, yeah, I think we unlocked a handful of courses. There's a great course by Tomer Cohen, who's head of product at LinkedIn, that is about generative AI for business, and I would strongly encourage it. I think it's really helps frame, if you're a business person, like how you would think about this moment. And
Mhm.
then there's like practical courses as well, using ChatGPT and mastering prompt engineering. But if anybody's feeling a little bit like, oh, I'm falling behind because I haven't been doing enough time in ChatGPT, I haven't been experimenting enough, I think maybe the one message I'd like folks to take away is it's still pretty early days. And so, if we say that ChatGPT launched November 30th, basically December 1, nobody can be that far behind. So there's no time like the present, and a lot of the changes are ahead of us. And so it's more like join it, join the process, engage in it, play with it, learn from it, and don't stress too much. Don't let the headlines or the what seems like the barrage of posts and such stress you out. Instead, think about like you're not late, you're right on time.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't get into that growth mindset. We're like, "Ugh, it's fine. It is what it is." But I do think in order for us to keep up with how quickly work is changing, we got to keep learning. And I think that's the beauty of this. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was going to share. Is there time to share a quick story?
Sure.
Here's a quick story. So I'm also in California, like you. I'm in Northern California, and there's a beautiful park here called Muir Woods. Historic, fabulous place. And I remember going there years ago and being at the ground level. And I like Disneyland, but I don't usually like Disneyland for trees. But it was Disneyland for trees. It was super, super packed, and we almost turned away. But we decided to go forward, and we were walking kind of through this crowd. And there was a chance to go uphill once, and we went uphill once, but the path diverged, and we thought, oh, this is actually better. And then there was a second chance to go uphill, and we chose that one. And actually, it became lovely. And then the shocking thing was we took the third choice. This is a true story, by the way. It sounds like a made up bit, but it really happened. We did the third choice where we could have gone level or up, and we went up. And somehow in this incredibly crowded space where down below there was this, Disney-like parking lot of a vibe, we had the sky all to ourselves. We were up near the canopy. We weren't even passing people going the other way. It was the birds, the leaves, and us. And so what I took from that, and what I try and remind myself is, when you're thinking about where to invest, a piece of it is some amount of self-audit about where your strengths are, what you enjoy, what you want to lean into. I think the second thing is when you're thinking about how you can contribute, it helps to contribute if you've taken a few of those choices to go uphill when maybe other folks are choosing to go level. That is, if you kind of lean into some intentional, select, scarce skills that kind of separate you and set you apart. And it is partially about career and personal advancement, but it's also about contribution. If there are things that you feel like Jessica, obviously communication is a thing where you've gotten to a very, very high level, and so you have a chance then to pay it back and to help others. You're not keeping it to yourself, right?
Yeah.
So for everybody, it'll be different. But it's been many years, and that idea of take a few of the choices that are a little bit uphill. I've seen it work for myself a little bit, and I've seen it work for other folks too. And so that's a general guidance I might share if that's helpful to people on the call.
I love that analogy though. It's like, at every point in our career, we have these inflection points, is what you're saying. And it's like you want to choose path A or B. It's not necessarily right or wrong, but you just keep going, right? And before you know it, as you're making these choices of A or B, B or C,
Yeah.
you might end up somewhere where you're like, oh my God, this is amazing, right?
And by the way, that doesn't always work. That's a very happy story. I can give you a couple examples of where I chose the harder path, and then I got there and I was like, this is not a good place to be. And that's where resilience helps too. So it's not as simple. That walk was simple, but the principle is true that the more intentional, the better to some degree. And if you are choosing occasionally things that are a little less widely chosen, you have more opportunities to contribute.
I wanted to answer one really quick question that I saw come into the chat function. This was earlier when somebody was asking about communication skills and how they can improve. There's multiple ways. I will say, here, if you go to our website, soulcastmedia.com, we have tons of communications training options. But, here on LinkedIn too, I have a few courses on communications on LinkedIn Learning as well. So there's just like a lot of different avenues. But the key here is you just got to do it.
Yeah.
There was another question, Dan, that somebody wanted to clarify. What does resilience mean exactly?
I'm sure someone else could do a better job, but for myself, resilience is the ability to I don't know, stay focused, stay constructive, stay kind to yourself, and be ready for the next thing after the first thing doesn't always go the way you wanted it. So it could be about what it's kind of weathering a storm to some degree. And for me, a lot of that, I'd be curious. Maybe I'll throw this to you, Jessica. Like for me, I have come up with a series of hacks, almost like mental tricks for myself. And I'll just give you one quick one, and then if it's okay, I'll throw to you to see if you have any, like, I believe in this kind of hacks, right? So every time I do a presentation, and I do a lot of presentations because I'm a ham and because I love it. And I was a speech and debate kid and all that sort of stuff. And it probably even after this session, which has been a delight, there'll be things that I beat myself up about. And I always say, yeah, I've almost never given a presentation where I've been like, yeah, and yet I signed up to do the next one. And at one point I taught myself, oh, that feeling of like, I wish I'd done X, Y, Z, which feels negative, I can actually reprogram my brain to think of that as positive, because the fact that I feel that way is what gets me to try to improve. Right. So I'll end this call and I'll think, why did I talk so fast? And maybe next time I'll solve that a little. So that's an example of, like, for me, a little bit of personal resilience,
Mhm.
that instead of saying I'm frustrated at this or that, therefore I'll stop, I've figured out a path that works for me to power through to the next one, and kind of do the things that I'm afraid of or nervous about or stressed by. So what about you, Jessica? Is there anything that
Yeah.
helps you?
The way I think about resilience is not dwelling in that feeling of failure for too long. I do think anytime you feel like, "Oh, I wish I could have done better," I think that's actually fine. I think that actually allows you to think critically of how can you do better next time. But I think where it becomes dangerous is when you dwell too long in that, like, self-loathing, that self-sabotage way of thinking of like, "God, that sucked, that sucked." It's like, "Okay, maybe it wasn't the best, right? But how can we do better next time?" So I think that's actually what resilience is, but more importantly, it's actually doing it again and not just like discounting it completely.
There's a phrase that we use at LinkedIn, and you may see it in the feed and such, which is next play, which can be used a few different ways. But my understanding is that this comes from someone named Coach K, who was a Duke college basketball coach. And I'm telling a story here that I've heard secondhand 50 times, so forgive me if I get this wrong. But the gist was that after every play, whether great or not great,
Mhm.
that supposedly Coach K would say, next play. And it's exactly your point. It's that the real trick is finding those ways to not spend too much time either celebrating necessarily or kind of beating yourself up. It's exactly like you said. It's so you can get on to the next one. So that next play frame is one I learned here, that I use probably every day.
I love that. And this is what I always encourage folks. If you ever hear anything that you're like, "Oh, I like that," I always say, just take a Post-it note, write that word down, and just post it near your computer, and it'll just kind of help you remember this. Okay, so as we wrap up here, how can folks get in contact with you, Dan, if they have questions or they're just like, "I really like this. I want to get in contact." How do they get in contact with you?
Yeah, if somebody, I mean, there is a classic rule that if somebody connects to you on LinkedIn and you don't know why, you tend to ignore it. That's at least for me, right? So if somebody wants to connect with me here, just include a note, even if you say I was at this session, or if you have a specific thing that you want to talk about. Yeah, that would be the number one thing. And then, I'll do my best to help out. But I'm glad everybody joined here. This is such a treat. I was going to share, I was going to confess the funny thing, right? Which is, this is my first LinkedIn Live, which is bizarre given that I'm kind of at LinkedIn, right? And so I said that to Jessica, and she was, what? So thank you, Jessica, for asking me to join. It's been fun chatting with you and getting to chat with everybody. I appreciate everybody making the time.
Yeah, it was actually so shocking to me. I was like, "Dan, you've never been on LinkedIn. You're like the one leading kind of like all the content and strategy."
I have no defense. I have no defense. So thanks for yeah, it's been a lovely experience.
Well, I hope I made this experience fun for you, and perhaps you'll join us once again and we can continue talking about skills and everything. Okay, so for those who joined, I want to say thank you so much. Whether it's your morning, your evening, your afternoon, just taking this time to just listen in. I am so appreciative of it because, again, the fact that you are here, it's a testament to you have that growth mindset. Like what Dan was saying. The fact that you're here is because you're curious and you want to learn. And honestly, kudos to you. So, Dan mentioned that there were some courses that were unlocked by LinkedIn. And these are just kind of like skills courses. So, instead of just putting all those courses in the chat, because there's like a lot, I'm going to put a link right now. You'll see it, soulcastmedia.com/events. If you go in and you RSVP, because it's going to RSVP for this event, because we always kind of send like this recap, we will include it in there. So if you go into that, that'll be a great way for you to get access to those courses that Dan is talking about. So,
And that's a set of courses specifically actually on things like ChatGPT for this moment. So there's a lot more in the library. The library has Jessica's courses and so much more. But
yes.
yeah, that's specifically if you're wondering about AI in this moment.
Absolutely. Okay, so a quick note. So we are going to be doing more of these Soulcast Media live events. I do these every other week or so because I just absolutely love it. We have so many topics coming up. I think the next one is about visibility. The one coming up, we have Kim Scott from Radical Candor coming, which is going to be fantastic. And we have so many other guests. So if you and I are not already connected on LinkedIn, please add me, connect with me, follow me, because I'm constantly sharing events and communication tips. Dan, thank you so much for taking your time and, spending it with us. And for those who are here, we appreciate you so much and we hope you have a great rest of your day. Take care,
Thanks,
everybody.
everybody. Thank you, Jessica. Take care.